Let's talk about one of the most unique books that I've read in 2023. Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Kris, and today's book review is The Fall is All There Is by C.M. Caplan. Now, before we jump into the review today, make sure you check in the description box down below for links to my social media and Discord should you want to come along for the ride. Now, The Fall is All There Is was such a unique blend of steampunk and fantasy wrapped in like a political family drama, and it was just delicious. There is no other way to put it. I had a great time with this book. Peter Mercy left his family and place in line for the throne 5 years ago, a choice in his best interest and one he has never looked back on. Well, that is until his father died. Now it's time to pledge his fealty to one of his sibling heirs, which would be much easier if they weren't all at each other's throats. Nervous and ready to fight for his survival in amongst his family's schemes, he loads up on a thyroid-powered injection and waits for his brother Edgar to arrive. As he travels back home with his brother, Peter catches wind that all is not what it seems. Edgar is tied up in some dangerous games and he isn't so sure he wants to be a part of it, wishing that he was still at home. With his other siblings sending communication and the stakes getting higher and higher, Peter wishes he was still back in the place he left them for so long ago. Caught up in a web of insane political plays, family drama, and trying to keep on top of his injections helping to control his sword, this makes for one hell of an exciting tale. Like I said, this is one of the most unique fantasy stories I've ever had the pleasure of reading. There was so much to love and unlock in these pages as we went through. The world itself was a mix of like spare parts and flesh. It had a sordid history with magic being like an underlying theme throughout its core. We had a great look at certain representations, so we had both autistic representation and also some queer normativity in this world, and it was just wild, but in the best possible way. Years ago, magic caused not one, but two annihilations, and with them came the destruction of many forms of organic material, people and animals included. This meant that the survivors needed to now be creative in how they go about their lives and how they use magic or if they avoid it completely. With the destruction of the land came the introduction of something called a gaunt. These are people who have ingested ghost smoke of people who have passed, and they become infected with the memories of these past people, no longer able to be their own person. These hybrid-like humans made for interesting and dangerous obstacles as the people we were following were traveling on foot or on their cyborg horses. It also meant that transport, so the cyborg horses, became a blend of organic material and also spare parts. And they were such a interesting, unique, and also gross. Like I wouldn't want to be on a cyborg horse, but I'm very interested in seeing what that looks like at the same time. But they feature heavily in travel. So these creatures that were sort of half flesh and half parts featured for some of our day-to-day travel in this story, and they were fascinating, to be completely honest. The world that we uncover in this book is dark. It is full of a rich history, and from the interactions that Peter had with various people across his travels to the new spaces, we get to explore it a little bit. And if I'm honest, this book is one of those ones where I wish I could experience it again for the first time because of the unique flair that it had throughout the story. This book was also wonderfully inclusive. We've got both autistic and queer representation in abundance. Peter is very open about his autism, and there are several places in the book where the reader is sort of invited to think about what that means and how can it be different for different people. There is no one size fits all when it comes to being on that spectrum. We get to see how Peter's autism has affected others in his life and also how others have reacted to him, and not always in positive ways. There was a section of this book, and I think it was with his mother, where I had a physical reaction at how poorly this person was being treated by someone who was meant to love and protect them throughout, their entire lives. And it made me stop and think of how people in real life sometimes react to things that they don't understand. And it something that happens to this day. It happens to people in all sorts of minorities, not just necessarily, the neurodivergence, but even in the queer space, that people still react in ways that aren't necessarily positive just because they don't understand something. So not only did we have the autistic rep, we also had the queer normativity. This book was incredibly queer friendly, with Peter and a few of our side characters openly expressing queerness without putting labels on it. Our characters were just allowed to be attracted to whatever genders and sexes they were attracted to in the moment. It wasn't a specific thing of, oh, I'm now attracted to X or I'm now attracted to Y. It's just sort of happened, and it felt naturally as we went through. And I really love reading that in books. It's probably one of my favorite ways to experience LGBTQIA plus content, is just when it's normal and not sort of commented on. They were always just attracted to people, which was extremely refreshing, and I enjoy that in my reads. Another thing that I think worth mentioning in this book, and I don't think I've seen it being spoken about before with The Fall Is All There is how well the author has written generational traits into characters from the same family. This is something that I find is often overlooked, and I overlook myself in my own writing, is fantasy stories with familial tension at the forefront, and seeing how the traits that our parents have sometimes will pass on to younger generations. With this book, we get a really good look at Peter's family in its entirety. Those both alive and deceased have mentioned, whereby we see how their traits have been passed down from generation to generation. It is an interesting sort of look at the nature versus nurture debate, I guess. Peter's brother Desmond shares some certain traits with his mother in terms of his speech and his mannerisms, and the performance in the narration of the audiobook really did showcase that, as well as obviously the story itself. And his sister shared traits with those of Peter's father. So it was very interesting to see those traits come through slightly different from another person, but also sort of an obvious throw to they've picked this up from somewhere. So these characters, I will say, still feel very much individual, but I thought it was such a cool feature to be able to pick up on while I was reading this book. If you couldn't tell, I really enjoyed The Fall Is All There Is. I think the author has a unique flair and a lot to offer with the genre and this particular genre blend, while staying unapologetically true to themselves. I can't wait to see what comes next. I'm not sure how many books are planned in this series, but I, for one, will be reading them all. Have you picked up The Fall Is All There Is? If you have, what did you think? If not, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and grab it. Let me know in the comments down below. If you like the content, give it one of those. If you want to see more of it, click subscribe at your will, and I will catch you in the next video. Ciao.